It is exactly 8:35 a.m. South African time. We cross over to Europe, Brussels in particular, and we are going to be talking with EU policy coordinator at the World Uyghur Congress, and that is Koen Stoop, regarding the outrage as the United Nations debate on China's alleged Xinjiang abuses are rejected. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shocking, isn't it? The outcome of this debate. We understand now that China has claimed victory as the United Nations Human Rights Council votes not to discuss allegations of abuses against minority Uyghurs. Why do you suppose they've gone this route? We do know several countries voted for and against, obviously, and I guess it is also about trade relations, policies, uh, loans, monetary loans, etc. But specifically, why do you believe it has gone this route?
I mean, first of all, I think it's been a great disappointment for Uyghur groups that the vote has turned out this way. I think you already highlight some of the very important aspects of why some countries decided to vote against holding a debate over the atrocity crimes happening in the Uyghur region in China. And I'd like to add to that these violations are no longer allegations of violations. They've been very clearly established and researched, most recently through the report of the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. And as if you already said, China holds an incredibly strong diplomatic and economic power over many of the countries that it voted against. So it's also interesting to see that the large majority of the votes come from countries in the global south, where China has a lot of economic leverage. So we believe that is one of the main reasons why these countries decided to vote against. Even some of the Islamic countries that
Absolutely.
are very actively speaking out against human rights abuses or Islamophobia worldwide, as they should. But when this happens against millions of their Muslim brothers and sisters, then that's a great hypocrisy in our eyes.
Absolutely. You obviously must have been very shocked by this outcome. Do you think, I'm not quite sure how the UN operates under these type of situations and conditions. Do you think that there might be an opportunity for an appeal, or is this now done and dusted till the next time they sit again to discuss these issues, despite the fact that we have now hard evidence showing all of those they call them I'm not quite sure what the Chinese terminology is, but we do know them as reconditioning camps, to wipe out the very notion of religion and everything and their culture, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. At the United Nations, the vote that happened during this session of the Human Rights Council, it's been done. Of course, there's no way to alter the outcome of this vote. However, that does not mean that there's no actions possible at the UN at all anymore. Of course, the Human Rights Council is just one UN body that is able to take action. So, in response to the outcome of the vote, the World Uyghur Congress and also more than 60 other Uyghur groups worldwide have issued a statement in which they called about other UN bodies and experts to use their mandates to address this crisis. So that means that in the coming months, but also during the next Human Rights Council session, a lot of action can still happen, and that's where our focus. That's what we are focusing on right now. So even though we are super disappointed at the outcome, we're still working twice as hard to make sure that this issue is meaningfully addressed at the United Nations. And indeed, as you say, like what China calls these re-education centers, what in reality are nothing more than internment camps. That's our aim, to make sure these are closed and that people in the Uyghur region are living in freedom and with their human rights being respected.
So, Kun, in the meanwhile, do you think that because China sees this as a victory, that they're going to up their efforts against the Uyghurs in terms of the re-education camps? Or do you think because they know that the world, the spotlight is on the issue of the Uyghur people, that they might ease up and start treating them in a more humane manner?
At the one hand, I think indeed China does see this as a victory. In various statements, it has welcomed the vote at the Human Rights Council, and in a sense, you can see this as in some way giving the green light for the Chinese government to continue its abuses. Because what the vote at the United Nations has shown is that the world apparently does not want to speak out, or that does not even want to debate such a dire human rights situation in China. At the other hand, I think the debate at the Human Rights Council and the fact that this resolution was tabled in the first place shows that there's a number of countries that do see the urgency in this situation. And I think this adds to the report of the Office of the High Commissioner, which says that these crimes may constitute crimes against humanity and that these require urgent attention by the international community. If we look at the vote count at the UN, for instance, it was 17 in favor, 11 abstentions, and only 19 against. So we see this as a small margin, and there's there's a lot of space for improvement there as well. So if you look at these margins, there at the same time there is a lot of criticism. There are a lot of countries that are actually concerned and that want to do the right thing. So I think this also shows to China that while this vote might have gone their way, I think in the end there is an adequate number of countries that is concerned. So in that way, I think China should be more aware of what it is doing and should address it meaningfully itself as well.
I'm just wondering if the Chinese are not putting undue pressure on the Uyghur people simply because they would want self-determination. And that's one of the reasons why they are oppressing the Uyghurs as they are. And I'm also wondering about the issue around, which is very surprising, of all people, the United States have condemned China and are also refusing to trade with China in the Uyghur cotton. The Uyghur people plant and, grow and do the cotton crops. They have actually stopped importing that cotton. And yet, on the other hand, the UK haven't taken any steps to make a grand and a bold statement in that direction. Do you believe that they may just go that route, and other European countries as well might follow suit, might follow the actions taken by the United States? Because that would send out a very strong message to the Chinese, would it not?
Absolutely, and that is also one of our main, recommendations to governments worldwide to, stop importing goods from the Uyghur region, since they are at enormously high risk to be made with Uyghur forced labor, which is yet another aspect of the crisis. Of course, people always hear about the internment camps and everything going on in these camps, but at the same time, there's a very extensive system of state-imposed forced labor being in place in the Uyghur region. Where Uyghurs are, taken away from their communities, or those Uyghurs that are in the camps are forced to work and produce goods that are sold all over the world. And you mentioned the cotton industry. Just to give you an example, 20% of the world's cotton comes from the Uyghur region. So this shows the implications this has for global supply chains, and also this should spur, interest and action from consumers as well. They should be aware that basically 1 out of 5 of your cotton products could be made with Uyghur forced labor. So our recommendation on governments is indeed to put legislations in place to address this. And the US, of course, has been one of the main actors in this sense. But we've seen in the European Union context, for instance, where the European Commission has just published a proposal to ban imports from forced labor products worldwide, but of course this also includes the Uyghur forced labor. In the UK, my colleagues and other rights groups are also working day and night to ensure that the UK is also having adequate laws in place to make sure that these products are not imported into these markets, but at the same time, for instance, also putting in place due diligence legislations to ensure that companies themselves are aware what is happening in their supply chains, and if such violations are happening, that they are putting these to an end, or in the case of the Uyghur region, exiting the region as a whole.
Finally, my previous question to you, is self-determination ever going to be a reality for the Uyghur people?
That is incredibly difficult to predict at the moment. If you look at the context, at the scale of the human rights violations, our very first immediate concern is that these human rights violations are put to an end. The concentration camps must be closed. The system of forced labor must be shut down. The violations against Uyghur women, such as forced sterilizations and abortions, these must be ended. the political prisoners must be unconditionally released. So I think a discussion about self-determination is something that we should have in the future, but only when these immediate concerns are addressed. And just to highlight, I think if we talk about self-determination, I think what the Uyghur cause also historically over the past decades has been about is for Uyghurs to have a meaningful representation in their homeland, politically, economically, but also having the freedom to have their cultural and religious practices. And I think the human rights violations against the Uyghur are purely about targeting Uyghurs just for being Uyghur. So I think this has moved way beyond any form of self-determination or criticism against self-determination. I think this is a much more direct attack on the Uyghur identity as a whole, rather than just be about self-determination or anything like that.
Koen, Stoop, World Uyghur Congress, thank you indeed for your time this morning. And hopefully we will talk again in a couple of months' time. And hopefully by then the situation will have eased for the Uyghur people. Thank you indeed for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
The time is exactly 9:46. News and views right here on Salam Media. Coming up next, our final interview for the morning is with Fatima Sidat. She is the development manager at SADC. We're going to be looking at the issues around World Mental Health Day, which is, of course, today.